Hello, language teachers. If you ask somebody what makes somebody a good language teacher, what do you think they would say? A good language teacher is fun, a good language teacher is professional, a good language teacher is organized. They could even say a good language teacher corrects their students. However, instead of just asking the simple question of whether you should correct your language students or not, we should perhaps be a little bit more critical, like Lister and Ranta in 1997, who asked questions such as, when should learners' errors be corrected? Which errors should be corrected? How should the errors be corrected? And who should do the correcting? So, in today's video, we're going to talk about a few different methods for correcting errors. In this video, we are going to focus specifically on oral corrective feedback. That's the speaking skills of your students. And at the end, I'll give you some food for thought, and if you're interested, I will redirect you to other videos. So, first of all, how could we correct our students' errors? Well, Lister and Ranta in 1997 look at two broad categories of corrective feedback. These could be reformulations and prompts. Reformulations are typically more explicit. That means that you will make a point as a teacher of pointing out the error that your student has made. One common type of reformulation is actually the most common method of corrective feedback, which is called a recast. We'll talk about that in just a moment. So if reformulations are more explicit, typically, prompts are typically more implicit. That means you may give your student a few signals and cues to try to allow them to recognize their error and to correct it. And those are the two broad categories for oral corrective feedback. Now, let's look at a few methods for oral corrective feedback. We're going to look at 6 of them, which have been proposed by Ranta and Lister in 1997. A recast happens when your student makes an error, and instead of stopping the conversation and correcting them explicitly, you might just repeat what they said but using the correct form. So for example, imagine your student said, "She go to the mall." You might say, "Oh, she goes to the mall. Where else does she go to?" And that way you could correct their incorrect speech pattern or utterance. Number 2, explicit correction. Explicit correction happens when you as a teacher actually stop the class or the conversation and indicate particularly where an error was made and how it should be repaired. So if your student says, "She go to the mall," you would say, "No, we don't say she go, we say she goes to the mall." Method number 3, clarification. Clarification would happen when you give explicit corrective feedback, just like we said before, explicit correction, but you also give a metalinguistic explanation. Now, what does this mean? A metalinguistic explanation would be a rule pertaining to the language and to that pattern. So for example, your student says, "She go to the mall." You as the teacher would say, "No, we don't say she go to the mall. We say she goes to the mall." Because when we conjugate a verb in the third person, we typically add an S, such as she does, not she do, or she loves, not she love. Number 4, this is called elicitation. Elicitation happens where you as the teacher try to trigger the use of a particular speech form from your student. Okay, so imagine my student says she go to the mall. I think as a teacher, okay, that is incorrect, but I'm going to give them another shot. I'm going to ask them a question which prompts the student to use the third person again. And let's see if they use it correctly or incorrectly. So I might say, "Oh, what else does she do on the weekend?" And your student might say, "She study a lot." So at that point, she's made the error the second time, but she might actually repair the rule and say, "She studies a lot," or "she walks around the block." So this could give your student another opportunity to use that original speech pattern by eliciting that form, that structure of the language again. Method number 5, this is called metalinguistic feedback. Metalinguistic feedback happens when your student makes an error and you don't particularly tell them where the error was made, but you just give them a rule about the language, which could guide their repair of that error that they made. So imagine your student says, she walk around the block. You think to yourself, it should be she walks around the block. So instead of particularly saying the error that your student made, you could just say to your student, hold on a second. When we use she or he or it, like the third person with a verb, typically we add an S to the end of the verb. And then see if your student could find that error and actually repair that part of the sentence. The sixth and final oral corrective feedback method is repetition. And repetition is not the same as the recast, where you actually repeat as the teacher what the student has said or what they should have said. Repetition would be to request repetition from your student. So you hear your student say, she study on the weekend. You might think to yourself, okay, that's an error right there. And you will say to your student, could you repeat that one more time? Could you just say that sentence one more time, please? And that could give them another opportunity to, take a jab at that sentence. So when should we use corrective feedback? Should we use it? Who should use it? Why does all this matter? We have more videos on the topic. I hope that this at least gives you a little bit of familiarity with the language that we use as language teachers while giving corrective feedback to our students. Hopefully this also helps you to communicate to your students what kind of corrective feedback you use in your style as a teacher, which ones you don't and why. Maybe even as a language student, you could actually communicate this to your teachers if you have any preferences of one method of corrective feedback over the other, for example. Thank you everybody for watching this video from Sala de Profesores. Happy days and happy teaching.